After my husband's passing, the right to inherit his estate belongs to my daughter and me, which means my brother-in-law Robert has no claim to it. However, Robert seemed oblivious to this common understanding.
Both Samantha and I have finished preparing to move. We just need to move our stuff in.
We agreed to sell our house because we heard you were giving us your late husband's house. Isn't that a different story?
Her words were punctuated by a loud shriek. As a result, Mia, who was inside the house, must have noticed the situation at the front door. I couldn't involve my daughter in this any further. Moreover, I wanted to avoid any further conflict with my late husband's family. And above all, there were our own family matters to consider. As I pondered, Mia had already reached the entrance. Upon seeing Mia's face, did Robert think he had found someone to manipulate? With a pleased expression, he began to melodramatically discuss their unfortunate circumstances and how they might be saved. Initially skeptical, Mia's face gradually paled. Finally, she spoke.
Do you not know, Uncle?
I intervened, silencing Mia as she attempted to say more. I didn't want to escalate matters any further. Besides, it was clear that explaining anything to them would fall on deaf ears. Understood. Feel free to use it as you please. My name is Olivia. I am 44 years old and work at a medium-sized travel agency. Despite being married and having a daughter, I juggle work and homemaking responsibilities. My husband, who is the same age as me, is incredibly gentle and calm. He never gets angry or causes a fuss. In fact, he's so caring that he readily extends a helping hand to anyone in need, often putting others before himself. I've admired this selfless quality since we were dating. I met my husband over 20 years ago at a mixer. Initially, I had reservations about attending such an event, assuming it would be filled with superficial, self-centered people. However, a friend dragged me along, and I reluctantly went, putting minimal effort into my appearance. My plan was to sit quietly in a corner, focusing solely on eating. But then I noticed a man. He was busy serving salad and tending to intoxicated guests. His considerate actions caught my attention, and I felt an instant connection. Despite not usually showing interest in the opposite sex, I mustered the courage to strike up a conversation. To my surprise, we hit it off. He willingly exchanged contact information, and we arranged to meet again. Even during that brief mixer, his kindness shone through. When we met afterward, he remained just as genuine as my initial impression. Thanks to the encouragement from those around us, we eventually got engaged and happily tied the knot. Unlike the typical cautionary tales, my husband didn't transform into a mean-spirited man after marriage. Instead, our life together has been remarkably peaceful. My husband and I soon welcomed our daughter, Mia, into the world. She was the most adorable child, born from our deep love. My husband, too, was elated by our firstborn. His usual friendly smile grew even brighter, and he seemed almost ready to dance with joy. Since I returned to work relatively quickly, we shared household chores and parenting responsibilities. We respected each other's roles, and our parenting journey progressed smoothly. Marriage and raising a child are both challenging endeavors. However, my husband's kindness repeatedly saved me. Thanks to him, we have enjoyed peaceful days as a family of 3 since Mia's birth. Even our adorable daughter, Mia, has turned 20 this year. Perhaps I'm a doting parent, but I believe Mia has grown into a kind-hearted woman, much like her father. She treats her classmates in middle and high school equally, impresses her teachers, and even strikes up conversations with elderly people she encounters on the street. Her excessive kindness, reminiscent of her father, does worry me at times. However, so far, she has navigated life without any major issues and continues attending university. Although Mia still commutes from home to university, I know that in a few more years, she'll be ready to stand on her own. I assumed our life would continue as usual, just the two of us, after her coming-of-age ceremony went smoothly. But then, at the end of January, a significant event shook our family.
Hey!
Honey! What's wrong? My husband collapsed suddenly at the front door just before leaving for work. I had sensed that he wasn't feeling well today, but I never expected it to be this serious. He had mentioned feeling slightly short of breath earlier, but otherwise, he seemed like his usual self. I was in the midst of preparing breakfast as usual, getting ready for work. In my confusion, I quickly called an ambulance and accompanied him to the hospital. They diagnosed him with a heart attack. Why? How could this happen? Honey. My words were a jumble, and I might have even screamed. Mia, who had been away overnight, rushed over, breathless.
Dad.
In the cold hospital corridor, Mia and I sat on a sofa, desperately praying for my husband's safety. The doctors did their best, but unfortunately, he peacefully passed away, leaving us behind. When the doctor emerged from the treatment room with a somber expression, I felt overwhelming despair. Don't leave us. Mia continued to stroke my back as I sobbed in the hospital room. Her warm touch thawed my frozen spine.
Mom. I'm here for you.
Her voice is as gentle as her late father's. Even as an adult, I always thought of my child as forever my child. However, witnessing her comforting gestures, even when she must be grieving herself, made me realize how much my daughter has grown. Perhaps Mia's unwavering support played a role in helping me transition my feelings, even if just a little. Thanks to Mia, I managed to arrange the funeral smoothly. During the funeral, I received words of comfort and sympathy from my husband's relatives. Grateful for each one, I continued with the farewell ceremony. Although it was emotionally challenging, Mia and the support of those around me helped me get through it. Not only Mia and my husband's relatives, but my own parents also expressed concern during the difficult funeral. They suggested that I temporarily return to their home for care and comfort. While it might seem unconventional to say this in such circumstances, considering my emotional state, they believed it would bring peace of mind to both Mia and me. However, having been married and away from my parents' home for over 20 years, I needed a little more time to think. So, I declined their proposal, and just like that, I found myself in the position of a widow. The term a widow sometimes carries an image of financial instability. However, as a full-time employee, I had some financial security. Mia's excellent academic performance also meant her university tuition was partially waived, which was a relief. Yet, after the turmoil settled, a new concern arose when we dealt with the estate and other posthumous matters. It was a problem that clashed with our tasks, and for the first time, I sighed at the memory of my late husband. What does the future hold for us? The shock was immense because I deeply loved my husband. Still, I knew Mia and those around us were firmly on my side. I resolved to face this issue head-on and consider our path forward. With that determination, approximately 2 months have passed since that day. Suddenly, without any warning, a car came to a halt in front of our house. It happened to be my day off from work, so I was surprised and stepped out onto the doorstep. The car was dirty and had visible scratches, and I recognized the license plate. It had been forcefully parked sideways near the garage in our yard. The impact had even chipped some bricks from the flower bed I was tending. Clearly, the driver had entered at quite a speed, maneuvering into the spot. Robert, what on earth brings you here? Robert, my late husband's younger brother, had arrived unexpectedly without any prior notice. His long, weathered blonde hair seemed even more faded than during the funeral. I hadn't noticed earlier, as he had been dressed plainly, but now he was wearing a worn-out t-shirt as his everyday clothing. As he stepped out of the car, he blurted out,
I'm taking over this house. Pack your things and leave immediately.
I couldn't fathom what he was saying. This house was jointly built with our savings after my husband and I got married. It wasn't Robert's family home. Moreover, Robert had never lived here, having been independent when I married. Except for family events, we rarely interacted with each other. Additionally, due to my husband's passing, the inheritance rights didn't extend to Robert, given my daughter and me. However, common sense seemed to elude Robert entirely.
Mia is his daughter, so it's fine. I, as his biological brother, have a rightful claim over this house, even more so than you, who are not blood related to him.
Robert proceeded to explain his current situation. Apparently, he was burdened with excessive debt and had to sell his own home. He claimed that, as the brother, he should rightfully inherit a portion of his late brother's estate. At that moment, I recalled something. Robert had a penchant for gambling, a fact that my gentle husband had expressed concern about Robert seeking assistance from the family. During the funeral, I was too distraught to pay attention, but now it all came back to me. There was an incident during a family gathering at our in-laws' house. It was the day after a family event at my in-laws, where only my husband had returned. Amidst the gathering of relatives, it seems Robert shamelessly asked for money from not only his parents but also my husband, who is Robert's brother and relatives. My husband, who typically refrains from speaking ill of others, surprised me by making such a statement. I remember feeling somewhat apprehensive about what kind of person Robert, the brother-in-law who could prompt my husband to say this, truly was. Robert's character was starkly different from my husband's warm-hearted and generous nature. Perhaps it stemmed from their upbringing. My husband, the eldest son, had been raised strictly, while Robert, who was frail as a child, hadn't faced much discipline or scolding. Although my in-laws didn't intentionally create differences, perhaps due to these contrasting experiences, Robert has grown into an adult who struggles to discipline himself. The older ladies in the extended family have expressed similar sentiments. Now, this very Robert is advancing toward me with a menacing expression. Even if you suddenly say something like that, this house. I was taken aback by the unexpected and unconventional proposal, which didn't align with common sense or legal norms. However, Robert continued, interrupting my words.
Both Samantha and I have finished preparing to move. We just need to move our stuff in.
He forcefully pressed on with his argument. As the tension escalated, another person stepped out of the car. She walked in high heels, a middle-aged woman. Although we hadn't interacted much beyond family events, I instantly recognized her as Robert's wife, Samantha. According to our relatives, Samantha had a peculiar hobby. She frequently spent nearly $400 on lottery tickets, claiming it was to make up for her husband's losses. Needless to say, this extravagant behavior didn't sit well with their family. Samantha joined the argument, defending Robert.
We agreed to sell our house because we heard you were giving us your late husband's house. Isn't that a different story?
Her voice echoed through the room. Mia, who was inside the house, must have noticed the situation at the front door. We heard footsteps descending the stairs from the second floor. I couldn't involve my daughter any further. Besides, I wanted to avoid any further conflict with my late husband's family. And above all, there were our own family matters to consider. As I pondered, Mia had already reached the entrance. Suddenly, Robert appeared in front of her, and Mia couldn't hide her surprise. Robert, upon seeing Mia's face, must have thought he had found someone to manipulate. With a pleased expression, he began melodramatically discussing their unfortunate circumstances and how they might be saved, seeking sympathy. Initially skeptical, Mia's face gradually paled. Finally, she spoke.
Do you not know, Uncle?
I intervened, silencing Mia as she attempted to say more. I didn't want to escalate matters any further. Besides, it was clear that explaining anything to them would fall on deaf ears. Understood. Feel free to use it as you please, I said, stopping Mia's surprised gaze. I informed Robert and Samantha that we would be vacating the house in a month. They seemed pleased that their proposal had been accepted. Given the physical and emotional challenges of moving immediately today, I requested some time. Perhaps because of this, Robert and Samantha were in better spirits and willing to listen. I asked them to leave for today, just temporarily, and took Mia back indoors with me. As soon as the front door closed, Mia furrowed her brows and said,
Mom, even if you say that.
Mia had been worried, but I had a small plan in mind. I whispered the details of the plan to her. She understood and agreed to cooperate. We decided to leave the house of our own accord. First, I would follow my parents' suggestion and return to my parents' home. As for Mia, she couldn't continue attending university from my parents' house, so she opted to live alone in a studio apartment. While I wished she would come with me, I understood that I couldn't ask her to give up her education. Besides, she had her own dreams and aspirations related to her university studies. Although I had previously emphasized the challenges of living alone, her determination was unwavering. With that settled, I planned to call my parents right away. Meanwhile, Mia was diligently searching for student apartments on her smartphone. My parents readily agreed to my return, and Mia's apartment search went smoothly since there happened to be vacancies. Additionally, we easily found movers for both of us, likely due to it being an off-peak season. Despite the suddenness of it all, the move went surprisingly well. And so, Mia and I bid farewell to the house filled with memories of my late husband. The moving process was complete, and Mia was gradually adjusting to living alone. One day, my parents' home's phone rang. I glanced at the unfamiliar number on the landline panel. Lately, there have been many telemarketing calls targeting elderly people like my parents, so I hesitated. However, the incessant ringing forced me to pick up the receiver. "Hello?" I answered. The moment I placed the receiver to my ear, a booming voice echoed through the line.
Olivia!
It was Robert, and his shouting was so intense that it felt like feedback. His angry voice was familiar, and I listened as he continued.
You know what they told me? That if I kept living in your house, they'd call the police. What's going on?
Robert sounded frantic. He seemed utterly confused, so I tried to calm him down before asking for the details. According to Robert, after we moved out, he and Samantha had indeed moved into our former home as planned. Initially, everything went well, they settled in and lived there for a while. However, things took an unexpected turn when an unknown real estate company showed up. Worse yet, the company's employees had a master key to the house, so they entered without permission, and Robert couldn't force them out. The real estate company claimed that the house was already listed as a used property for sale, and if Robert continued to stay, it would be considered trespassing. This couldn't be right. Had they mistaken another house, or was it a scam or robbery? Robert was convinced and argued back, but it seemed that the police were genuinely close to being called. I sighed heavily as I listened to the whole story. Indeed, that house has already been sold. As the real estate company stated, it should now be listed as a used property for sale. Robert seemed stunned by my words, and I could hear Samantha's voice in the background, exclaiming her confusion. Robert shouted again.
What are you talking about?
I wasn't lying. Without a doubt, I had sold that house. Moreover, the transfer of ownership had already been completed just before Robert and Samantha visited. The issue that came to light after my husband's death was related to his own death. During the estate proceedings, I discovered this for the first time. While I knew that estates could sometimes include negative aspects, I never imagined it would directly affect us. Apparently, my husband had acted as a guarantor for a friend's debt. That friend had disappeared as soon as the guarantor section was filled out, leaving my husband responsible for repayment. We even found documents demanding payment from my husband's creditor. The circumstances surrounding why my late husband decided to assist his acquaintance remain unknown. Perhaps he trusted the person too easily and willingly signed, or maybe he was coerced into it. Given his kind-hearted nature, the former seems more likely, but the truth remains in darkness. What's certain is that his kindness and generosity worked against him. Furthermore, his silence about the matter likely stemmed from his desire not to worry our family. The amount demanded was substantial, certainly not something I could easily pay, despite my job and my daughter's relatively low tuition fees. When I consulted my parents, they responded,
Why not sell the house and come back? We're always ready to welcome you.
My parents had previously encouraged me to return home after my husband's passing, and now they were suggesting it again. With one family member gone, our house felt too large for us. I became open to the idea of selling it. I couldn't remain in shock forever. Now that my daughter had grown up and become an adult, perhaps it was time to start anew. I agreed with my parents' proposal. As for Mia, whether she would accompany me or live independently remained undecided until the last moment. However, when Robert and Samantha visited, the house had already been sold. In other words, at that point, the house was no longer mine. That was the truth of the matter.
I never heard any of that.
I was trying to discuss the matter of the house's ownership at that time. I replied, interrupting their conversation. Robert and Samantha, oblivious to my words, continued to insist that the house rightfully belonged to them. Anticipating this outcome, I had already considered moving back to my parents' home and confirmed Mia's readiness for independent living. We left without further ado, leaving the house behind. This had been my small plan. Still, I couldn't help but think that if Robert and Samantha had taken the ownership transfer seriously and completed the necessary paperwork, they wouldn't be in this situation. Unfortunately, their carefree attitude, failing to even transfer the title, led to their abrupt eviction under the guise of legal proceedings. It seems they clung to the real estate company until the end, but eventually, they were truly reported to the police. Although they didn't acquire a criminal record, they were forcibly evicted. Robert and Samantha had already sold their own house, leaving them with no place to go. They sought refuge with Robert's parents and relatives, burdened by their belongings. However, their extended family knew all too well about Robert and Samantha's debt-ridden situation. They refused to accept a compulsive gambler into their homes, including their parents. Even though Robert and Samantha had apparently considered seeking help from me and Mia, they had no way of finding me, given their lack of knowledge about my parents' home. Additionally, they were unaware of Mia's university or her current residence. We were confident that we wouldn't be hounded by Robert and Samantha. They were no longer our concern. Robert and Samantha, left with no other options, seemed to spiral into despair. They poured their remaining funds into gambling and lottery tickets, only to suffer significant losses. Despite this, they were averse to the idea of living as homeless or relying on government assistance for a meager existence. Their desperation led them to even borrow from loan sharks, and they continued their cycle of gambling and lottery, seemingly undeterred. However, this time, their involvement with loan sharks left them with no room for evasion. During a meeting where my late husband's parents apologized for their initial misunderstanding, I learned that Robert and Samantha had fallen into this dire situation. Even his parents had no further information. They can't even trace their whereabouts, and lately, there's been no communication or even requests for money. When I think about it, their situation becomes somewhat apparent. The fact that my late husband's brother has fallen into such circumstances is heartbreaking. His parents' feelings must be even more intense. They regretted having indulged their younger son too much during his frail childhood. Moreover, the consequences of their elder son's generosity had now affected their grandchild. Despite it all, they sincerely apologized to me and Mia. They assured us that they would not assist Robert in the future. Initially, I felt uneasy about the role they played in this situation, but their genuine eyes convinced me that we could continue our relationship amicably. They prioritized Mia and me, handling the situation with care. Although my husband was no longer with us, Mia and I promised to visit my in-laws regularly. Mia, who loved both my parents and my late husband's parents, was thrilled about this arrangement. As for me, returning to my parents' home meant leaving my previous job. Unlike my daughter's university, which was still commutable, I was at an age where long commutes were no longer feasible. I decided to prioritize my well-being and avoid unnecessary stress. Despite my husband's passing and selling our house, my colleagues and superiors expressed concern about my work situation. However, I found a job in a similar field that allowed remote work. Currently, I rent a room in my parents' home and diligently work from there. Adjusting to working from home has its challenges, but I'm gradually getting used to this new lifestyle. Mia and I keep in touch regularly. Although she's feeling quite anxious about her new life, I believe my daughter will be fine. She's putting effort into managing household chores, studying, and working part-time, all while receiving guidance from friends who live alone. Learning from this experience, she has become more cautious about excessive kindness, recognizing that it can sometimes harm oneself.
First, take care of yourself. Mom, you need to prioritize your own well-being.
During her recent visit to my place, Mia shared these encouraging words. I felt both touched by my daughter's growth and reassured. Mia, with a bashful smile, added,
Right now, my goal is to find someone wonderful, like you and Dad, to share my life with.
Oh, you thought of me that way? Her words filled me with indescribable joy. We exchanged smiles, mother and daughter. Although I know I'll face more challenges ahead, I'm determined to live strongly with the help of Mia, my parents, and the people around me. I want to create a beautiful life, one that my late husband would be proud of.
How did you find this story? If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to our channel. Until next time.